I've had the privilege of being in the boardroom with you a couple of times. And so first question, quickly, maybe we'll digress from there. You're the most prepared board member I've ever worked with. So tell us a little bit more about your preparation and why you do what you do and how that's helped you, and maybe it'll help the founders as well.
My goal today is to say if you walk away with 2 or 3 things between Sumant and I that really are of value to you, we've accomplished our goal in this last half an hour before we have the glasses of wine. Many of them, Jamie, on it. But originally I learned, in part because I was dyslexic, the better prepared I am, the more effective I was. But then I realized I could do 15 sessions in one day if I was loaded with repeatable data, where when I dealt with anybody, whether it was a board meeting, a head of state, a person I was recruiting, anything else, if I knew more about them and more about the topic than anybody else, you immediately differentiated yourselves. So at a head of state level, when I talked to Prime Minister Modi, President of US, President Macron, I know the topics that are important to that individual. I know what their position is. I know what value I add beyond just a general approach, and I try to make that meeting the best meeting that she or he has, not just that day over a period of time. That preparation makes the difference. And then I try to only stay within areas where I have subject matter expertise. If it's an area that I don't add value, I try not to approach it that way. But the speed at which you can add value is much greater with the preparation. And once you get used to it, Mike, as you know, and Yvette, as you know, you can do it very, very quickly. So instead of slowing you down and being bureaucracy, it actually, something I didn't like originally as a young CEO, process adds speed.
And I can tell you as a co-board member, because we sit on a few boards together, I've started to prepare better too, thanks to you, because you have to keep up and you notice details when you know others don't, and I think it's very important. Now, when you look at a startup and the pace at which a startup needs to move with very little resources, you always talk about replicable processes. You've always talked about how you've used the same process for M&A and for how you've integrated your acquisitions, made them successful. What's the theory behind that, and what can the younger companies you work with learn from that?
Okay, so a couple things. Let me start with your first comment. It's important for the young CEOs in the room, and young in terms of your energy level, not your age necessarily, is to realize you're the head of the dog sled. And no way your company's going to move faster than you can. At the same time, if you move so fast that 1 or 2 members of your team breaks down, the whole team's in trouble. So realizing you set the pace, you set the culture, you have to own it, but you've also got to do it at a pace that you can bring the company with you for the long run. Where you're leading me in terms of talking in more detail about why I believe so passionately in a replicatable process, it allows you to outline a vision and implement it with the success rate, attention to detail as well, that others do not have. I mean, it just rolls off your tongue. You acquire 180 companies, and 2/3 of which were successful in an industry where 90% of them fail. It just rolls off your tongue that we have a process in selecting our new startups, which I believe conservatively 6 to 7 will be unicorns out of 18. And it wouldn't
some of the ones we've done together.
I hope all of them that we do together, because you guys add that much value. But it's because of the way that we prepare and the way we execute off of that. The example that several of you might be familiar with, we run our innovation acquisition process so fast at Cisco that we could get a call on a Thursday night for a $3 billion acquisition for a company. I didn't even know what it was, but the head of the NASDAQ said, "John, you're an idiot." And I said, "I know that, but what did I do wrong this time?" And Bob said, "You're going to miss the most important acquisition you could do this year, and your competitors have been there for a year, and everybody in the market knows what's going on except you." And he told me the name of the company. I had no idea who they were. Called up my business development lead. He didn't either. I called up the CEO of the company at 10 o'clock at night. He agreed to meet with us the next morning. At noon that day, we had a handshake for a $3 billion acquisition. We had it through both boards of directors. We had our HR teams there. We had secured the top 20 people in the company. We had outlined a common vision approach and announced it. And our peers didn't even know we're there. Speed. But without a replicatable process that has real substance and strong framework underneath of it, you can't do that. You can sit down with any country leader in the world now and discuss what does digitization in their country mean. I know the 11 to 12 plays they're going to want to run. I just don't know which sequence they're going to run it in. And it's like any customer, you want to say what's important to them to how you do it. Down to how I personally believe that we as investors should select the companies we invest in. And remember, I'm a strategic partner first and a mentor to the CEO. I'm betting on Mike with Provoro, his ability to really bring that to the only secure phone in the world. I'm betting on Gustavo to bring artificial intelligence, not just in the customer experience, but across all enterprise in a way that no one else is able to do. I'm betting very much on Umesh in terms of what he can do at Unifor and the ability to do the customer experience with the speed and implementation that others cannot do. But what lies behind that is a replicatable process where I always try to catch a market in transition. You compete against transitions, not competitors. Competitors is how you keep score. And then I look for what is the new technology, because every industry, every company, you heard this from digital marketing in the conversation before us here, will be a technology company. So if you're just using technology that's been out there for a while, even if there's a market in transition, your ability to break away is harder. So I try to catch a new technology combined with new business models and a market transition occurring, number one. Number two, it's about the CEO. We talked briefly about that at lunch. But it is unfortunate. You've got to get a super smart, very highly motivated, often a CEO who takes a few too many risks you have to pull back, and that's easy enough to fix. But a CEO who can set a vision and strategy and really has the courage to make that happen. And then I look for, do they really want to be coached? Do they really want to have the tough discussions during good times and bad times? Are they secure enough in what they want to do to give you the feedback when they think you're giving the wrong advice, and know that in the end it's your decision, Mike, on what we do, and Gustavo what we do, and Umesh and what we do. The third thing I look for is, are they near an inflection point? And I try to time it 1 to 2 years out. Sometimes that works really well, sometimes a little bit early, and being early is as bad as being too late. But is it an inflection point with their ability to be the 1 or 2 player? And as we alluded to earlier, by having that definition, it forces me not to invest in a company that's 1 of 10 that has an opportunity to grow in an industry that's growing at 100% per year, because that number 4, 5, and 6 player won't make it, in my opinion, longer term on it. And then I go straight to customers. There was only one Steve Jobs. He just somehow knew what to build. Still took him 7 years. But I go straight to customers that the company's already got. And I only need 1 or 2. And usually if they give me 2 customers, I'll know the decision makers in one of them. And I'll go and say, how vital is this to your future? How unique is it? What does this company really mean to you? How do you find the company the ability to work within it? And then I look at other factors behind it. But that allows me to do an evaluation in 1 day if I needed to, just like an acquisition would in 1 day. And it also forces you to be pretty candid about, can this company be 1 or 2 in its category? So it is that innovation playbook, and then being able to repeat those plays with faster and faster speed, that I think we as investors need to think about. And we as young CEOs of startups, at least in mine, need to think about as well.
And so in every board meeting I've been with you, John, you've put a lot of emphasis on culture and team.
Yes.
As much as you have about looking at the details and processes, repeatable processes, and speed, which I think is very important. What makes for a winning culture, and what have you seen work as a winning team?
And what causes the failures?
Which is the next.
So let's go in reverse order. What causes the failure is when the CEO has their team get together and say, what do you think our culture should be? They look at 7 or 8 companies like Netflix and maybe a Cisco and others, and they come back with, here's what our culture needs to be, our mission. They put a stamp on it, and they put it in the drawer. They announce it to their team. CEO doesn't walk the talk. They don't drive it down through the organization. Culture should be as important as strategy and vision, and the leadership has to treat it that way. Mistake I've made, never hire somebody into your company that doesn't match your culture. Netflix culture, it's not a family organization. Their CEO, who I really like, but it's a professional sports team. It is, they get the best draft picks, they pay the best money, they encourage the draft picks to go out and look to see what they can get in the market. They maintain them because they pay them extremely well, and by the way, it's up or out in terms of the approach. Oracle, I love Safra and Larry. They're a rough and tumble company. Very much top-down type approach. Don't focus on customer sat as much. So I believe that culture is the core element that really differentiates companies. And you've got to be sure that you stay true to that culture. It keeps you out of trouble.
Yeah.
We got when I was at Cisco, an SEC investigation, a Justice Department investigation to possible inappropriate actions based in Russia by a whistleblower. After 3 years of investigation, and anybody that's ever done anything in Russia knows what the channels are like, knows what the business are like. We are the only company that I'm aware of that ever came away with a complete, clean bill of health. And they usually, I'm no longer CEO of a public company. They usually shake you down for $25 million at the end of the deal, say, we'll let this one just settle. We won't have any admission of guilt, we want to smack you a little bit. That was all culture. Without it being at our country level, our head of the Middle East level, every transaction, without sitting down with the top distribution channels and say, I'm not going to tell you how you do your business, but if you cross this line with us, we will let you go. And we did let go one of the top major distribution channels, probably owned by one of the very top people in Russia. And when I got asked the question by that person, and they never said they owned it, I said, that company lost trust. And that's not how I do business. So it's deep in your DNA how you do that culture, and it keeps you out of trouble. If your team only makes the decision on culture for every decision they make, and you've done your culture right, they should know exactly what your decision is. And it isn't different as you go around the world. I mean, any decision on what you do in a customer situation, any decision on what you do with a personnel situation where the person's misexecuted, any decision you make about did we treat an employee right and what should we do to fix it. If you look at your culture, it should tell you what you should do or not do.
And the failures, John, you mentioned one, which is hiring people not of your culture. Two more.
Well, my personal failures is, I think many of us might face this as well. You do the right thing too long, and you don't even realize you're doing the right thing too long. 10 years into being able to run my business, knowing exactly what the orders would be based upon what it did on a Monday, the 360th day of the year, a Tuesday, anticipating the week, the year, the numbers over 40 quarters never missed. And if you could imagine, for those in your room who run businesses, we were within our guidance 40 quarters in a row with 82% of our business being due every quarter. And the numbers were just so good based on our pipeline, our spill out rates, what we'd done on the prior days. And so when the market changed, I trusted those numbers so much. And I looked at what the numbers said, having just grown 70% the first week in December. And I'd forecast only 35% growth next year, piece of cake. Even though the market was dropping, and even though stocks were off a little bit. I was doing the right thing too long, and I didn't realize I needed to have both an analytical approach, but I really had to have a customer and market approach. And when the numbers dropped from 70% growth first week in December to minus 30, my customers didn't stop ordering. 25% of them went away. 20% of my volume was gone. And the minute I went out and touched base with customers and channels, I should have seen it coming. Now, the lesson learned is you're going to make mistakes, and when 2007 hit, I saw it coming, called the market right. I tried to enter the consumer market 3 times, and I failed 3 times. And part of the consumer market issue is I couldn't listen to customers the same way I could to businesses and governments, et cetera. And part of it is that I ended up not using the technology leverage in the right way to make things happen. And so something that sounds like a fatal mistake, i.e. I did a $600 million acquisition of a beautiful company called Flip, and it was really technology leading for those of you. How many had a Flip camera at one time? Really cool, wasn't it? Well, we competed on the device. Think what would have happened if all we had done is taken Flip share, video, moved it to the cloud, an industry standard across all smartphones, and pushed all the smartphone players to do this with us. We would outmaneuver Apple. However, once Apple stood up on stage and Steve Jobs said, this is a wonderful product, our product, my team's going, see, I said, watch what comes next. I'm going to give it to you for free. He had me. And we closed it in 90 days. We could have stretched it out for 9 months. $600 million write-down. Would that bother you? Yeah, but it shouldn't have bothered my investors. I told them that 2 out of 3 acquisitions was better than anybody in the industry would do. I did a $3 billion acquisition, a $2 billion acquisition, $600 million. If one's going to fail, what one do you want to fail? And I look at the investors like my dogs look at me when they don't understand. And then they look at me like, you don't understand. And this is where leadership is lonely. But I tell the stories because you won't remember the takeaways unless I tell you the story first. And that's something for both investors, board members, and especially for the CEOs to realize. The way your team will remember your messaging is you'll tell them through stories that they can remember. And you've got to show your personal side, which is hard for me to do because originally I thought as a CEO I was supposed to have no weaknesses, superhuman, and be able to make all the calls right. And I was lucky because growth allows you to do that a lot easier than others. But I found that once you were transparent at the right time in the right way without losing confidence, it made you more effective with your team, more effective with the market, et cetera, in terms of direction.
So a couple of things you touched upon at lunch, but we never really expanded on. Maybe we'll take a minute or two to talk about that here, is the role of technology in society in general, both the good and the not so good that it can be used for, and how pervasive technology has been in the last decade or so, and how I'd say society and governments haven't been able to keep up with it. And what do you see happening in the next 5 to 10 years? What still gives you optimism and hope, and what gets you excited?
So 5 questions in the sequence. I'll see
You've
if
got
I can
3 minutes.
remember them
3
in
minutes.
the approach. So if you think about it, during the 90s with the internet, we had 0 issues with any major government in the world, even after Snowden. There was a lot of work through it, but none. And what we did is we had a belief in tech being for good. We knew we were going to destroy jobs, but we also spent a huge amount of time creating more jobs, doing issues like Cisco Network Academies. You saw it from Intel, you saw it from Microsoft. We created many more jobs and trained people for where the market was going. We also got to know all the regulators before there was an issue and took time to develop trust so we could get the real issues, on using today's words, on security or privacy out on the table early before people formed opinions and then were arguing religious type of battles at the top. And tech was viewed as good for 90% of Americans, and tech was going to benefit almost everyone, every state.
Right.
We lost that, and let me be very candid, I think some of the big companies really misexecuted. I'm a believer that you've got to do what is right economically for your company, but you've also got to do what is right for society. Now, we won every corporate award there was imaginable, whether it's in China, Democratic president, US president, Middle East, about giving back and for good, but we also grew faster than anybody else, and we were tough competitors. And the industry as a whole did that. In today's world, people are not making decisions on what is the implication for society. And if we don't, government's going to change the definition of capitalism. And if we hide behind, well, you've got to always do what is in the shareholders' immediate best interest today, we're going to get what we deserve. And I believe it's a 50-50 chance. I'm very close to the leaders in Washington, very close to many leaders around the world. They don't like big tech anymore. I think the salvation is actually startups and small tech and reestablishing job creation. And for those of you doing your companies, I really want to encourage you to have an equal role on economic return, but also giving back. When your average employee probably isn't going to stay with you for 2.25 years, if you have an environment that this is a place that is very successful, but also gives back, and you do things to change society, guess what? I guarantee you those employees that you're going to want are going to stay longer with you. So it's also just plain good for diversity. And then the other element is we need to be embarrassed. The gender diversity is not good, and diversity as a whole in our industry is not good. Only 6.5% of VCs are female.
Yeah.
The boardrooms are increasing, but not at the pace they need to increase. The number of CEOs in this room, and I've met several of you, of your companies, you get funded at 1/3 what your male counterpart does with the same idea. We have to fix that. And I don't think it's that hard. I'm not being critical. But we've got to have the ability to dream and make it happen. So I answered 3 of the 5.
Thank you. this is about being in the boardroom. There's one thing I've noticed in every board meeting I've been with, with John, is that every engineer in that company wants a selfie with you. So I think that's at least one takeaway I have, other than the CEOs wanting more and more of your time.
Yes.
I think just in the context of being the end of the day, maybe we can just, for you, spending a day here, a day and a half that you have, what's been the one key takeaway from this time that you spent here?
Well, I learn more in these sessions than I give back, but I become even more convinced that the future of this country and the future of other countries is how do investors and VCs and startups become the innovation engine, the job creation engine, the dreamers for the country. And without this type of collaboration, and at March Capital, you all do an amazing job. We teased earlier about how the hotel people view you all.
Right.
I've watched you, how you treat people. The culture is amazingly good. But I think we have a chance for this to be the model for the future. And what took it away is I hope that this is going to be more the norm for venture capital, for investments in startups than the exception. And I came away with several of the companies, if I had some extra time and they give me some really good terms,
yeah,
we might be able to make some investments together.
For you, always. Yeah.
Always.
Always.
But, you know, the last comment is, you know, as a leader, when you come from the sales and salespeople want to take a picture with you, it's a tremendous honor. You know you've arrived when the engineers want to take a picture with you.
Believe me, it's hard to leave the room with John. We have a couple of minutes. Maybe take a couple of questions from the audience, if anyone has a question for John.
Now, the fun part about questions, and there it comes from the back of the row, is anytime you get a question from the very back, it's dangerous because they feel very secure back there. They think they can take a shot at you. You don't even know who they're going to be. I'm coming right back here. You look them in the eye. It is so hard. You give them a elbow pump, and you say, what is your question? It's going to be hard to ask as tough a question now.
So John, you were a sales guy before becoming a CEO.
Okay.
Now, as you're making an investment, you look at the sales guy to be the CEO, or you want the tech visionary to be the CEO, or do you have a point of view?
Okay. So the question is, I was a sales guy before I became a CEO. Do you want a sales guy to be the CEO or a tech guy to be the CEO? And the fun part is, the reason I didn't carry a microphone out for the question is if I didn't get a good question, I would just reframe it as I walked away. But that question was excellent. And the answer is, I look for the engineer. I'm a mathematical player. I do pattern recognition pretty well. 70% plus of the companies come with an engineering background because it's about getting the product right. And that may evolve over time. So if it's just purely math, I tend to lean toward the engineering background. But out of my investments of the 18, about a fourth of them are non-engineering approach. So it depends on the CEO, but in any event, the commonality of the CEO being wicked smart and wanting to be coached and building great teams is common. Next question. Please, sir.
By being CEO before and turning to a professional investor,
Yes.
how do you think being CEO before helped you as investor, and how do you think that being a CEO before doesn't help you with it?
So how does being a CEO before help you as an investor, and how perhaps does it not help you as an investor? The first is, it's like one of the reasons I want all my startup CEOs to be on boards. I want them to be on the other side of the boardroom and realize as a board member, what do you want from the CEO? And so having been on both ranks, you know both how to do it. I've seen every movie. I've made every mistake. I love talking about the successes. They're much more fun. I've made every mistake imaginable. And the ability to turn to a team and say, here's not definitely what's going to happen, but here's probably what's going to happen if you do this, Mike. Or, you're right, this is really going to be bad. It's going to be a tough couple of months. Here's my suggestions. I'll be there for you, available 24/7. You've seen the movie. Where it hurts you is if you've been a CEO, and it's much like the startups in this room recruiting people from large companies, you sometimes go over with your biases, your skill set, your bag of tricks from the large company. You try to apply it to small company, it will fail miserably because you forget what a small company is like. Small companies have a problem every other week. Big companies have a problem twice a quarter. You've got to go through into the details. You've got to say why culture is important. And often the big company CEOs have forgotten how much of this was just a machine that was operating which they got very good at driving, candidly often better than I would have been able to drive it, but they forget all the reasons that made the company grow from a small company to a bigger company. And you've got to, as a CEO, forget that were the CEO. As a board member and investor, you've got to realize your value is to provide good ideas, but you're not part of the management team. You're not the CEO's boss. I will tell my team that always. I'll give you good ideas. Hopefully you'll follow a number of them. But in the end, you've got to make the call. I'm not the CEO. And so pluses and minuses on it. Now,
I think we have one more question.
No, we always say one or two in case we don't get a good one to summarize on. No pressure.
Two more.
So you talked about speed, culture, and process for acquisition.
Yes.
One of your competitors or competitive companies, HP, had acquired a large company in autonomy.
Yeah.
And they did it fast and miserably failed.
Yes.
What was it the culture that cost them, speed, or process?
It's a good one. Now, to just show you I'm still good on my feet, I can dodge a question halfway and still give you a good answer to your question. I'm going to dodge the specific company involved, but hit the real process issue. I believe the majority of companies that are acquired in high tech are going to fail. And to be very candid, a large reason we broke away from a number of our peers is the peers tried to copy our ability to innovate through acquisitions, and it was miserable. And you have to get that playbook out. Mergers among equals do not work. For those of you who've been around, and several of my colleagues in this room have, the best thing that happened to me in my first 6 years there at Cisco, actually first 4, was that my two toughest competitors, Wellfleet, great router company, Synoptics, a gate switching company, combined. 2 equals, and I can say it now, Wellfleet probably had as good a router as we did, and Synoptics probably had as good a switch, and you never combine equals. It was East Coast and West Coast cultures actually in reverse. Best thing that ever happened to me, they crashed and burned. Only thing better than that was when Alcatel and Lucent combined. French company, New York company, cultures couldn't have been different. They did the classic mistakes. So I actually like it when my competitors bought companies because they would probably mess it up. But when they didn't, you have to assume the best on it. But what they often do wrong is they don't go back to the basic rules. It's got to be really strategic to you or it's not worth the risk. You never acquire a company with a different culture, and those cultures were dramatically different, to answer specifically. You never acquire a company that it's not very clear how all sides win in the acquisition. And the last thing you do is acquire a company that wants to leave as soon as you bought them within that. And so I think there was probably 4 or 5 mistakes in many of the acquisitions that were done, and that's not uncommon. It's more the rule of thumb. And for those of you, 70% of the startups, your exit strategy is to be acquired. How's the best way to get acquired? Build a culture and a strategy that can take you to an IPO, because that's what the acquirer really wants. If you agree with everything Sumant and I just covered, we failed. Want to make you a little bit uncomfortable, hopefully a little bit of entertaining. Jamie's going to buy drinks for us here in 5 minutes. And with that, it's been an honor.
It's been an honor. Yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.